Yes, friends. Chairman sir has not joined, so we should wait for 1 minute.
Please go ahead, ma'am. We are live now.
Thank you. Good afternoon to Shri Supratim Bandyopadhyay ji, Honorable Chairman, Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority, PFRDA. Shri Suranjan Banerjee, Associate Director, Retirement, Willis Tower Watson. Shri Mono Fukon, Chief General Manager, Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority, PFRDA. Ms. Meeta Parulkar, Partner Tax, Global Business Tax. The ASSOCHAM esteemed members and distinguished guests who have joined us to attend this timely and meaningful discussion on pension funds. On behalf of ASSOCHAM, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you at the ASSOCHAM and PFRDA National Pension System for Corporate Securing Future with NPS and Awareness for Employer, and my special thanks to Shri Supratim Bandyopadhyay ji for sparing his valuable time to address the industry. The National Pension System, or NPS, has been in the news throughout this year, thanks to the number of changes introduced by the PFRDA. The awareness around NPS as a retirement avenue is rising, as it is evident in the expanding subscriber base. Even though it's a retirement planning scheme, it offers subscriber the options to invest for their other goals too. They can do so through the Tier 2 or investment account. As per the types of accounts that can be opened under NPS is concerned, we can have Tier 1 and Tier 2 account. The latter is optional and can be opened only if you already have Tier 1 account, which is default pension account. Contribution to this primary account carry tax benefits under sections 80CCD1, 80CCD1B and 80CCD2. Contribution to this account are eligible for tax benefit up to the overall ATC limit of 1.5 lakh, while additional contribution up to 50,000 can be claimed as a deduction under 80CCD 1B. Section 80CCD comes into play even if your employer contributes to your NPS account up to 10% of your basic salary, and DNS allowance is allowed as a deduction from your total income. On the other hand, contribution to Tier 2 will yield no tax breaks. The Government of India, in exercise of their executive power, adapted National Pension System based on the defined contribution in respect of all new entrants to central government services, excepting armed forces, with effect from 1st January 2004. Most of the state governments have since notified a similar pension system for the new entrants. PFRDA has also made NPS available to all citizens of India with effect from 1st May 2009 on a voluntary basis. In pursuance to PFRDA's commitment to make available an avenue for saving for old age to all sections of society, PFRDA has now launched a separate model to provide NPS to the employees of corporate entities, including PSU, since December 2011. This model is titled NPS Corporate Sector Model. PFRDA is the regulator for NPS. PFRDA is responsible for appointment of various intermediaries in the system, such as Central Record Keeping Agency CRA, pension funds, custodians, NPS, trustee bank, etc. PFRDA monitors the performance of these various intermediaries. PFRDA provides regulatory guidance to the PFMs of the investment funds received under NPS, and it also ensures that all stakeholders comply with the guidelines regulations issued by PFRDA from time to time. The Central Record Keeping Agency is first of its kind venture in India and is critical to the successful operationalization of NPS. The main function and responsibilities of CRA, including record keeping, administration, and customer service functions for all subscribers of NPS, issue of unique permanent retirement account number, which one calls PRAN also to each subscriber, maintaining a database of all PRNs issued and recording transaction relating to each subscriber's PRN and acting as an operational interface between PFRDA and other NPS intermediaries such as pension funds, annuity service provider, trustee bank, etc. The custodian is responsible for all custody of underlying assets. Custodian is a SEBI-registered custodial services providing fulfilling conditions on foreign holdings and cross holdings of government may prescribe. Corporate may join NPS through any one of the existing POPs. This will facilitate employees working under the various organizations to come on board NPS within the purview of their employee-employee relationship, subject to norms prescribed by PFRDA. Corporate may directly approach POP as entity for its employee to join NPS. Corporate, along with POP, should also be required to comply with the provisions of Preventions of Money Laundering Act 2002 and rules framed thereunder as may be applicable from time to time. The employees of the corporate entity enrolled by the employer will be registered as subscriber under NPS. Each subscriber will have a separate individual pension account. If an employer does not make choice of the PFM or scheme preference, each subscriber will be able to select a pension fund manager registered under NPS. Each PFM in the system will provide limited number of simple standard investment schemes with different risk and return profile. Subscribers will have option to switch savings between the investment schemes as per the terms of their employment, subject to such condition and charges as prescribed by PFRDA from time to time. With these words, I would like to conclude my address and would now request Shri Bandyopadhyay ji to kindly deliver his presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you, madam, for giving a nice introduction to NPS. I believe you have given in detail what NPS is for and what NPS does. And on this occasion, I want to thank ASSOCHAM for joining hands with PFRDA in taking these pension literacy and pension awareness programs further. Already we are working with many other industry bodies like CII, FICCI, PSD Chamber of Commerce, ICC and all that. And now with ASSOCHAM joining, I believe all the major industry bodies are there with us, through whom we are trying in our own small and humble way of spreading the message of NPS, spreading the message of retirement benefits and why it is so important in our life today. Not only the population of the country is increasing, but we are aging too. And it's a fact of life that today at the age of 60, an Indian is supposed to live for another 18 to 20 years. And sometimes beyond that. And these are the averages that we are talking about. So the mortality experience that we are seeing in India today has improved quite a lot over the last few decades. Obviously, the improvement in the medical sciences and all that, and the facilities which we have at our doorstep today, that makes it even more easier to access different medical facilities. And that's why people are living for a much, much longer time. But what happens during that period? So long we are during our working life, if you look at it, what happens that every month end we are getting a paycheck. If I am having my own business, I am self-employed, they are also maybe at the end of the month or at the end of certain time period, I am getting paid or I am getting some kind of a business profit. Through that, obviously, all my uh, physical demands, all my expenses are taken care of. But a time comes when that working life comes to an end, whether we like it or not. People, those who are in business or maybe those who are self-employed, they feel that they will continue forever, but that does not happen. So a day comes when all of us have to stop working. But as we know that the lifestyle that we have built up over maybe last 3-4 decades, that continues, and we have to spend quite a lot. And most unfortunately, a large part post 60 years of age, a large part of our expenses are taken care of by the medical expenses that we make. And today we have seen the medical costs. So that way, there are certain things we cannot really avoid, even if we wish to. As I said, the old age population is increasing, and with proper support, financial support, it will be very difficult to ensure that they live a life of dignity. And 18-20 years, mind you, it's not a small time, it's a pretty long time to spend. If we look at our Indian formal support system, we have different kinds of pension schemes or retirement benefit schemes, but it is very, very fragmented kind of thing. Even from government side, there are social security schemes kind of thing, but that covers only a small part of the population, and no government can afford to give everybody the kind of support that they require. So it's a high time that those who are really capable, they start early and they build up a retirement corpus of their own. As I said, the pension system in India is quite fragmented. We have many, many kinds of pension, or so to say, retirement benefit schemes, starting with maybe EPFO. Everybody knows about EPFO. Then there are insurance company managed pension schemes, which are approved pension schemes. There are approved superannuation schemes, which are managed by the corporates on their own. Then there is NPS, managed by PFRDA. And apart from that, we have a guaranteed pension scheme. Of course, the guarantee comes from none other than Government of India, that is called APY, Atal Pension Yojana, which gives a guaranteed pension in the bracket of, say, 1,000 to 5,000 rupees a month, not more than that, and in the age group of 18 to 40. So anybody in that particular age group, they can enter, they can contribute on a monthly, quarterly, or half-yearly basis, and at the age of 60, they can get the benefit of this guaranteed pension. And other than that, there are different kinds of other specific kind of provident funds, like for coal miners, seamen, Assam tea planters. Then there are certain pension schemes or retirement schemes coming from the mutual fund industry. All taken together, we have a total pension asset base or retirement benefit asset base of 33 trillion rupees. We collected the latest data wherever it is available. Of course, in some of the cases, we could not get the data even as at 2021. But the latest information says it is around 33 trillion rupees. It is just about 14-15% of our GDP. But those prosperous countries like some countries in Europe or US or maybe UK, Australia, there we have seen that the pension assets of that particular country is more than 100%. In some cases like Netherlands and Denmark, it is as high as 223% and 213%. That is twice the size of the country's GDP. That shows that we have a long way to go. And to match up to that particular stage, where people who are retiring or those who are coming to the end of their working life, at least they have the satisfaction of having a corpus. The biggest uh, problem that we see here today about retirement benefits and pension, unless it is a mandatory kind of a thing, which is there for, say, government employees who joined after 2004 January, that NPS is mandatory. Or for many organizations, provident fund deduction is mandatory. Unless you make it mandatory, obviously people normally try to postpone that kind of decision. They feel that we are still young and we have maybe 30, 35 years to go. So why think about pension? And that is the biggest mistake that we make in our life, and we always delay. And by the time they really decide that it is high time we do something about our retirement corpus, by the time it is already late, and they create some kind of a corpus, but that is not sufficient to take care of their needs even post retirement. So always there is a possibility that that person will outlive the corpus that he or she has created over a period of time. And secondly, this assumes even greater importance because of the fact that the informal support system today in India, which used to come through joint family system, is all but gone. The joint family system has crumbled and there is no informal support system today. So everybody has to think on his or her own. So the key fact is that one has to start early. And as we go along in our life and our cash flows increase, we rise in our workplaces, we have to take necessary care to see that we set aside the amount of money that we really require. When we decide about how much money we really require, one has to think about the lifestyle. One has to really think about the kind of return that accumulated money is going to give. One has to think about the inflation rates that we are going to face. Today, even if 40, 50,000 a month seems to be here with me, maybe 10 years or 15 years, 20 years down the line, that may not be enough. Then obviously we have to think about the tax rates. Today, annuity income is also taxable. So depending on what tax bracket you are, you have to take out that tax part also. Suppose I think that today maybe 50,000 in hand is good for me. If I am in, say, 30% tax bracket, maybe I have to think about a gross annuity amount of close to 70,000. And accordingly, I have to create a corpus. Today, since we are talking to an industry body, let us talk about how much corporates have really helped us in getting into NPS. If you look at the numbers are quite impressive. More than 9,600 corporates have registered themselves under NPS. By registering, it does not mean that each and every corporate has to contribute on behalf of their employee. Very few of the corporates, mostly we have seen that the banks, public sector banks, since the old pension scheme is gone, so what they have done is that they are also contributing and their employees are also contributing. Till the other day, it was 10% each, but now IBA has taken a decision quite recently that as an employer, they will be contributing 14% of the salaries of the employees, whereas the employees themselves will be contributing 10%. But apart from the banks and very few corporates, mostly these are voluntary schemes where the employees, they themselves join and they contribute according to their wish. And here where the role of the corporates come in, and I believe they have a very big and important role to play. The first role that a corporate can play is that to ensure a good number of employees, they really join the scheme and they start contributing early. And a word from the employers, I believe, will go a long, long way in encouraging the employees in joining these schemes. Whenever a new person joins, along with Provident Fund, if the employer talks about NPS also and gives a choice, then obviously looking at these two choices, let the employee decide where really to go and where really to join. Because not all corporates, they are mandatorily under Provident Fund. So maybe they have opted for Provident Fund as one of the options. So they can give NPS also as an option. Because we have seen, and when Suranjan gives his presentation, we'll know that how different layers of protection like Provident Fund, gratuity, NPS, superannuation adds to the net replacement rate, which is nothing but what percentage of last earned salary you really require to maintain your lifestyle, maintain your dignity, and to meet your expenses post-retirement. So I believe this kind of session will go a long, long way. We have about 4 crore 80 lakh customers. Out of that, only 13 lakh come from the corporate sector. And as I said, more than 9,600 corporates have already joined. So if you look at it, we have the breadth. We have covered a lot of corporates, but we don't have the depth. Means for maybe each of the corporates, hardly 2 to 3% of the employees, they have opted for NPS. So they are, as I said, the corporates have to handhold their employees and tell them that this is another option. Why we are talking about the corporate employees is that, and as Madam Sheth told, and very rightly so, that it is not only a retirement benefit solution, but during the accumulation phase, it gives you a pretty competitive return. Because we have seen our equity funds since 2009 that we have our track record. The CAGR returns on equity funds is about 12.8%. It has seen all the ups and downs during these 12 years, and right now for last few sessions, we have seen what kind of corrections the equity market also has seen. Nifty has gone down by almost more than 2,000 points from its recent highs. Similarly, our debt funds, the corporate bond fund has given a return of close to 9.8%, 9.86%, despite the credit events we have seen in the market. And our government security fund has given a return of 9.4%, obviously because we have seen hardening of interest rate during last 2-3 months, and it has gone up by almost more than 50-55 basis points. So even after that also, over a period of 12 years, it has given a return of 9.4%. So not only it is a retirement solution, it gives you competitive return while you accumulate your fund. It gives you a lot of choices. Obviously, my colleagues, Chief General Manager Mona Fukan will be talking about that. But few of the choices I'll also try to tell you is that it gives you change of the fund manager at least once a year. It gives you change in the investment option, your asset allocation twice a year, which we are again trying to increase the frequency of that. That also we are trying to give. And these are all free of cost. All these things are available. So if you wish to change your investment pattern, looking at the hardening of the interest rate, and if you feel that no, this is the time, maybe a little bit more I can put in equity, you can immediately change it. And these are all online. Our onboardings have become almost online, though physical onboardings are happening. But apart from that, online onboarding nowadays, it is almost 40% of the total number of onboardings that we have seen. KYC, there are many relaxations we have given, so that we have seen that good many people, they are joining. Awareness level is increasing, but still I believe we have a long way to go. We are making a lot of changes. We are learning from the situations and looking at the longevity of people. Now we have increased the age at entry from 65, the maximum age at entry was 65. We have increased it to 70. And somebody who is joining NPS can continue up to the age of 75 if they wish. Otherwise, at the age of 60, they can always exit and they can take 60% of their funds free of cost, and 40% they have to convert into an annuity, which will give them a regular pension. While increasing the age from 65 to 70, we are just wondering that how many people will be really interested. It is little over 2 months old, and I am very happy to share with you in that age bracket of 66 to 70, about more than 1,200 people have already joined. So that shows that at that age also people are ready, they have the funds available, they are ready to join, and they are ready to create a corpus. That shows that the kind of longevity that we are going to see in future, and people are preparing for that. Last almost close to 2 years, we have seen the effect of the pandemic corona, and it has affected almost every financial sector. But touch wood, the NPS sector is still not affected in a big way. All through this close to 23, 24 months that we are under the control of corona, that our onboardings have never gone negative. The lowest growth rate that we have seen during this period is 10%. And I'm very happy during this year, the first 9 months, of course, there's still few days in December left. The first 9 months, we have seen more than 60% growth in the number of NPS onboarding vis-a-vis what we have seen last year. That shows some kind of awareness is creeping in, but I believe we have a long way to go. That's why I again thank ASSOCHAM for joining hands with us, and I thank my co-speakers for joining today. My colleague, Chief General Manager Sri Mono Fukan, Suranjan Banerjee, Senior Actuary from Willis Tower Watson, and Madam Smita Parulekar will be talking about the taxation aspects. And thereafter, we expect questions and answers, and we'll be too happy to answer those things. So thank you, and I hand it over to you for the next speaker. Thank you.
Request to Mr. Suranjan Banerjee, please. Hello.
Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, great. So whenever you're ready, if I can get the sharing rights, I'd like to put up my presentation. Thank you. If someone can just confirm that they can see my slides.
Yes, it's visible.
It is
visible, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, so I think thank you, Mr. Chairman, ASSOCHAM, for giving us this opportunity to speak here today. A very warm welcome and a very good afternoon to everybody. We are privileged and honored, to be able to speak at these events alongside the PFRDA. So thank you again for giving us this opportunity. Okay, in terms of sort of my remit for today, I'm going to talk less about numbers, but I'm going to talk more about sort of perspectives, right? So, and the way I'm going to try and present this to you is by looking at what I would call two sides of the same coin, which is one is the employee's view in terms of how employees are looking at retirement benefits that are available to them today, both mandatory and sort of voluntary. And then also I'll sort of flip that around and say, okay, what are employers thinking, right? And sort of where is the middle ground? Are the employers being able to provide benefits which are fit for purpose? Are the employees sort of valuing these benefits? Do they feel they're appropriate? And will they lead to any meaningful outcomes? I think, as Mr. Chairman said, there are lots of benefits out there, but not enough education around sort of, how do they add up and what a future state potentially might look like, given the uncertainties involved, not only from a life expectancy point of view, but also from an investment return point of view, because a lot of these returns are market linked. So two surveys. So one is going to be the Global Benefits Attitude Survey, in which we will look at the response from about several thousand employees from the corporate sector. I'll start with a few generic slides, which cover global, responses towards retirement savings. But I will narrow down and drill down into the Indian context, right, which will make more sense, bring some more meaningful insights for all of us on the webinar today. On the second survey is basically the survey where we've got the employers to respond in terms of how they're feeling. And these, as you can see, the second survey is actually done while COVID was still sort of around, and so it probably takes into account some of the nuances or some of the considerations that COVID also brought up. Right. So with that, I'm just going to dive right in. And before I go into the Indian context, right? So this is what we'll start with the employee perspective. And before I go into the Indian context, I think it's good to bring out some sort of key themes which we can clearly see are emerging from a global context, right? So first, we find that there's been a definite erosion of the retirement provision. And what we mean by that is, the level of security or the level of benefit either has been affected in an adverse manner as far as the employee is concerned, right? So we're talking about, and a very simple example is moving away from what you would call, let's say, guaranteed defined benefit plans, which are more passé these days because we don't see them anymore. Even the government sector has moved away from these plans given the high cost it brings. And therefore, the employees are therefore, they're not getting the right amount of security. So what was guaranteed and therefore the cost was accruing to, let's say, a government or an employer before, those outcomes are no longer guaranteed. And therefore, the second point is that the responsibility is now falling on employees with, the provisions being more defined contribution in nature, which basically takes the risk away from employers or governments or any kind of sponsors of these plans and places it very squarely on the employee shoulders themselves, which means that all of a sudden they have to make some very important decisions about how they're going to fund their retirement. Also, the last piece is that we find that people aren't really prepared, or the risks are actually being increased, and this some of this is also on account of the fact that people even late in their careers are still struggling to manage other commitments, which could be debt, and fewer of them actually have access to their own house, or have some sort of access to housing wealth, which basically means that either they're repaying mortgages or they're still paying rent, which basically means that probably comes higher up in the priority, and therefore retirement is something they're sort of parking for the future. But once you get to those higher ages, you suddenly realize you probably don't have enough corpus, and on top of that, if you don't have a housing arrangement, then that's going to make life a little bit tougher. Okay, so in terms of moving into the Indian context, so this slide actually talks about how Indian employees from the corporate sector are feeling. So we basically found that 30% are not heading, or at least they feel that they're not heading in the right direction in relation to their overall financial position. And this could include various aspects such as something as simple as emergency funds, which I think was again brought to the fore in COVID times. A lot of folks realize they don't have emergency funds to cover unfortunate events, whether they be health related or let's say loss of a job. Also, on the other hand, making sure that you have enough long-term savings to meet key life goals, right? So thinking about compartmentalizing your funds into different buckets, and each bucket, meeting a certain objective, as opposed to just having, thinking about money and running sort of your household paycheck to paycheck almost. 30% also feel that they're not heading in the right direction when it comes specifically to their retirement savings. It basically means that they don't think that they are putting away enough funds to be able to have a meaningful or sustainable retirement. Nearly 60% also feel that they're not saving enough for retirement, which links in with the broader finding that individuals are struggling to be able to retire, at ages in previous generations. Now, we know that, previously the retirement age used to be about 60 years. And if you look at the developed nations, that's, very quickly gone to 65. And if you look at a specific example, let's say from the UK, that's already being staggered to 68. And this is just the state retirement age that I'm talking about. So as people are living longer and longer, they are struggling to be able to retire at ages that, the previous generations may have retired at, because life expectancy at, 60 has increased. And I think, like Mr. Chairman said, 18 years probably as a bare minimum from a general population, but those in good health could potentially live a lot longer than that. Right. So the silver lining in all of this is that, a lot of folks who actually said or acknowledged that they are not doing, or they weren't saving enough for their retirement, have actually acknowledged this and have taken steps, whatever small steps they can over the last couple of years. More than 50% have actually responded by saying that, look, we know we are probably not in great shape, but we are trying to do what we can. And this could be, something as simple as, let's say, voluntary contributions to retirement programs. Slightly different cross section of the same. So you can see on the right hand side, how many which employees are falling behind. So we can see that, again, this is more a perception thing. We've not really looked at their strategies or their bank accounts, but this is basically how they feel. And you can see that, typically folks in the lower income bracket tend to have a higher level of concern. So you can see, those with less than 6.5 lakhs as income, 40% almost felt they were falling behind, whereas people beyond a certain threshold of 17 lakhs, only 19% felt they were falling behind. And if you look at sort of generation wise, the elder folks, what we call the baby boomers, or, are actually feeling better off as opposed to their, those folks who've been born after them. This again could be a function of the fact that, the baby boomers have had defined benefit plans, or, housing wealth, or certain other things that probably the new generations are not getting access to. Also, I think, if I just compartmentalize all of the population into sort of 3 very distinct buckets, what we find is 30% actually feel they're falling behind on retirement savings, and also said they haven't done anything in the last 2 years, as opposed to 40% or 41% who said that they are on track, and they feel that they'll be comfortably safe, they will be comfortable whenever that retirement event was to be triggered. And about 30% said they're kind of in between, whereas, they acknowledge that there's a problem, but they're trying to fix it. Right. So I think, what does this mean in terms of numbers, right? So what I did is just trying to put some numbers up on screen, and appreciate that quite a few of them. So let me just firstly introduce the concept of what is called the net replacement rate, or net replacement ratio. I think, sir, you alluded to this at the start. Is very simply put, what can you expect as a pension income as a percentage of what you were earning just before you stopped working, right? So basically, if your pension income is 50,000 rupees a month and your last drawn pay was 1 lakh, then your replacement ratio is 50%, right? And typically, looking at examples in the West, we find that a replacement ratio roughly, about sort of 60 to 70% seems to be okay. In fact, the UK social security system is designed around making sure that people can get 2/3 of their last drawn salary as pension income, at least in the defined benefit era. Of course, they've had a lot of reforms since then. Right. So here, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm just going to ignore taxes because I want to keep this example simple. Of course, tax does play a pretty important role in how people save for retirement and what incentives they have access to. But just coming back to the example, this is just considering somebody who starts working at the age of 23, has access to the mandatory plans, which are PF and gratuity. So the first bar refers to that. Then, I've kind of added a superannuation fund, and then I've added NPS on top of that as well. So if they only had access to the PF, which is 12% of basic employer and employee, as well as the statutory gratuity benefit, they would actually only be able to secure about 1/3 of their last round pay as pension income. And it should be remembered that actually PF and gratuity are both lump sums. So this actually makes a pretty important assumption that whatever wealth they get, they actually exchange for a pension income as opposed to taking the cash and spending it or taking a holiday, etc. If I add the superannuation fund, and again the assumption being that all of the monies you receive from the superannuation fund, both the pension and the cash element, are actually commuted for a full pension, we find that the coverage actually increases to 46%. And then finally, if you add the 10%, which with the 10%, when you add the 10% of basic salary from NPS, you find that actually reaches the 60% mark and goes on to about 63%, which is kind of getting to that respectable zone that I spoke about of 60 to 70%. Having said this, quite a few things need to be considered. First and foremost, this particular example considers the person to have started their contributions to all these arrangements at the age of 23. Realistically, what we find is people tend to defer, any kind of retirement savings, and the power of compounding, which I'm sure everybody knows about by now, is basically the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. So even if you start small, the key is to start early so that the power of compounding can really work in your favor. The later you leave it, the more it works against you, because you've got to make up a lot of money in a very little period of time. Therefore, the interest also cannot, come to the rescue. So start early, even if you start small, is one of the key messages. Additionally, I think, certain assumptions about interest rates and returns have been made in the calculation. Of course, things like annuity rates, interest rate risk is always going to be there. And in the new world, it's going to be with the employees, right? So not with the employer. So it's important to keep the employees educated about some of these risks. And again, that's something that the employers can facilitate in order to make sure they understand and are able to then, calibrate and start their calculations to retirement savings at a time which works better, and they still have some time for the power of compounding to work for them. Okay, so now I'm just going to flip this around. I'm going to talk a little bit about the focus on the employer side. And again, this survey is a little bit out of date, so just bear with me. We are currently working on both these surveys all over again as we sort of come out of the worst of the COVID-19 crisis. So we basically found that even last year we had NPS is really gaining a lot of popularity. And I think, like Sir said, several thousand corporates have actually implemented NPS or are providing access to corporate NPS for their employees. Of course, a lot of this is basically on a voluntary basis, so nobody's forcing anybody to join NPS, but at least more than half the companies are providing the option to join NPS. And as you can see, another 20% are either progressing or planning or at least considering it. So the next time we run this survey, I expect that coverage or that prevalence to have actually increased significantly. Again, two sides of the same story, even though a lot of companies are providing it. But like I think Mr. Chairman said at the start, take-up rates or participation rates in this voluntary program remains low, right? Wherever the program is actually voluntary, participation remains low. And for that, I think one of the key reasons we feel is the employee education, awareness, and engagement, where I think employers have a very, very important role to play to make sure that employees make an informed decision regarding their retirement savings programs. So as you can see on screen, 1/3 of the companies actually reported a take-up rate of less than 5%, and only very few actually reported, less than 10% actually reported a take-up rate of 25% or more. And we kind of felt that the average is about 10 to 11%. Again, going back to the replacement ratio example, I think there's a lot of room for people to increase their participation, or companies to increase or try and motivate employees to join NPS to achieve higher replacement ratios when they do retire. I think the bottom slides are just about more flexibility. So a lot of companies are offering flexibility around NPS contributions. So instead of saying you have to put in 10%, or if you participate at 10, you have to be at 10%. That's not the case. A lot of companies are offering incentives, ability to join at lower rates. However, financial incentives remain low. Right? As you can see, 60% of our survey respondents are not providing any financial incentive for employees to join the NPS program. But again, even though you're not providing financial incentives, there still is scope to provide education and awareness. Right, very quick note on superannuation funds. So I think superannuation funds, as we know, are getting less and less popular. They require income tax approvals before you can make any changes. They're difficult to move around. A lot of companies are struggling with superannuation funds where people have historically participated but have now left, and they can't find them or track them, so they can't really close the fund and settle people. So 8% of our survey respondents actually said that they've already ported their funds from superannuation fund to NPS, and another 34% said they're looking at porting, right? So, and again, what we feel is that this is the future. We feel that a lot of companies are going to take advantage of the ability to port from SAF to NPS, just because it gives a lot more freedom to the employees in how they want to manage their own retirement funds, and also frees the employer of any sort of fiduciary responsibilities, which were very cumbersome on the SAF side. Right, I think I'll just conclude with a couple of quick points on recent regulatory changes. So we know that the Code on Wages 2019 has already been passed. There's as part of the larger Code on Social Security for 2020. Again, implementation date remains a question mark, but the fact that it's already been passed means it's sort of just a question of when it actually gets enforced. And also the tax regime. Sorry, I think. Slide. Yeah. So what does that mean for employers and for employees, right? So there's definitely going to be a broadening of the definition of what we're calling wages. And as you remember, that a lot of these social security benefits are currently linked to what is called the basic salary. But now with the wider definition of wage, potentially that's going to mean that the salary on the basis of which these calculations are done is going to go up. And if that goes up, then definitely there's going to be an increase in the gratuity provision. There'll be a potential increase in even leave encashment plans. So there are lots of companies which have historically allowed large number of leave days to be carried forward. So whenever those come to be paid out, it's going to be probably be based on a much higher salary. And then finally, Provident Fund, for example, right? So that's also currently linked to basic, even though that's less of a that's more of a gray area because of the 15,000 rupee ceiling salary that is currently in place. However, we'll have to wait and watch on exactly what the fine print says when the rules are actually formally published and put in the public domain. So again, employers need to consider this. They need to be watching out for this. And whilst only 13% had actually got some impact assessment done in 2020, we feel a lot more companies are looking at getting ready for the wage code whenever it's notified. I think that's right on time, so I'll pause here and happy to take any questions towards the end. So thank you for your time, and I pass this back to the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to request to Mr. Manoj, please share your valuable input.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh. I'll just share my slides. Can I have the rights for? Thank you. I'll just start with the product features of NPS. A lot have been said about the product features. Said also, in fact, in opening remarks. So I'll take it short and just go on a brief note of what NPS is all about. So when we talk about the individual pension account or the NPS account, we say that it's a unique account number in the sense that an individual can have only one account. And it is transferable or transportable across employments. So he need not open another account if he changes employment, whether it from government to private or within private also. The number would remain the same. So the same account will be used to create the pension accumulation throughout his working life, wherever he is working. Or if he's self-employed also, if he's not having an employer, that account can be maintained by his own self without an employer also. So that is one of the uniqueness of this, that the account number, the pension account number will be staying same throughout his working life. The next point I'd like to highlight is that we have the lowest cost pension scheme, not only in India, it is across the globe. So the total cost over a period of 35 to 40 years is only 0.2%, which is one of the lowest. And the benefit of having a low cost structure is that the corpus accumulation will be higher, because cost will not eat away the returns or the contributions that go into it, which helps in accumulating a higher corpus. Choices regarding the fund manager, record keeper, the asset allocation. There are a lot of multiple choices regarding that, which I'll come on my later slides. Returns, as Sir has also told, where we have been able to deliver attractive returns or double-digit returns over the period of 13 years. And regarding tax, Madam Smita will be detailing it, the benefits of joining in NPS on relation to the contributions, the accumulation phase, and at the point of exit or maturity. So there are a lot of tax benefits into it. It's typically a triple E product, exempt at all stages of the contributions also, accumulations also, at the point of exit. Transparency and online access, I mean that every transactions in the account that has been done by the individual, it can be tracked at any point of time, and it has access 24/7. And over and above all this, we have a lot of intermediaries which functions different activities and undertakes inside the system, and these are regulated by us and registered or licensed by us, and we monitor them. So the two different types of accounts that we have. The first one is the pension account, that is the Tier 1 account. So that is compulsory or that is mandatory to get into the or join the system. So normally when we say that we have opened a pension account, it's a Tier 1 account. The Tier 2 is an optional account. It can be opened only when you have the Tier 1 account. Tier 2 can be opened. So what happens is that the tax benefit, the difference between these two is that in the Tier 1 account is the pension account. It has all the tax benefits. There are certain restrictions on withdrawal. The minimum contribution is 500. Annual contribution is 1,000 rupees. And there are tax benefits into it. And the Tier 2, you don't have much of tax benefits into it, but it has the flexibility of withdrawals. It can be withdrawn anytime. You can deposit today, you can withdraw it tomorrow also. And the minimum amount required for activating the account is 1,000 rupees, and 250 rupees is the subsequent contribution. In both these accounts, there is no limit on the number of contributions or the amount of contributions that a subscriber or an individual can make. Only in Tier 2, there are no tax benefits in the sense that withdrawals or the gains that would be arising would be taxed at the marginal rate when the person redeems it. But on the other hand is that government subscribers or government employees who are opening Tier 2 account, and if the contributions are locked in for 3 years, they have benefit of the contributions under ATC. So to join this system or to open an account, we say that there are two conditions required. The KYC has to be complied, and the citizen of India, resident, non-resident, and overseas citizen, age between 18 to 70 years. This age of 70 has been increased recently. Previously, it was 65 years, and the account can be opened online without paperless digital signing. You require only your PAN number, or you can authenticate through the Aadhaar XML or Aadhaar direct authentication, and you need to have a bank account number. So we will be requiring only those two factors and a photograph of it, and it can be digitally submitted through Aadhaar authentication or OTP authentication through the mobile. Or otherwise, the form can be also deposited physically in any of the distribution points. We call it as point of presence. Almost all the banks are there. We have almost 93 entities which are functioning as point of presence, and they have a complete set of branches that's nearing about 83,000. So the next phase is after opening that account, contributions flow in. And if an individual joins, has an account without an employer, he can contribute as and when he wishes, without any restrictions on the amount or the number of contributions that he wants to put in. But he joins along with an employer. we say that we have flexibility of contributions. The contributions can come from both or can come from only one, the employer also or the employee also. And if it comes from both, the proportion of contributions can be equal or unequal. So flexibility has been built in. Either the employer can contribute only or the employee can contribute only, or if both of them contributes, they can contribute equal and unequal proportions also. So after this, contributions comes in to the account. These are invested by the fund managers. We call it as pension funds, and they invest the funds according to the investment guidelines that are been stipulated or notified by us. So at the end of the day, after the investments are made, the fund manager declares the net asset value of this asset class or the scheme that has been invested into, and the contributions that has been made by the subscriber are converted into units by the record keeper. We call it as a central record keeping agency, and we call this process a unitization process. And in the pension account, units will get reflected as credits in the subscribers or the individual's account. So as and when contributions comes in, units get credited, and the value of the units will be derived by multiplying with the net asset value declared by the fund manager, which is being declared on a daily basis. So after the accumulation phase is over, you come to the exit or the maturity phase. We call it a normal exit if it's the subscriber is exiting the system at the age of 60 or at the superannuation age, which can be lower than 60 also, maybe 55 or 58 or whatever the employer declares at the superannuation age. So in a normal exit or in a superannuation, at the point of superannuation, the 60% of the corpus is being given as a lump sum, and 40% is being has to be utilized for purchasing an annuity plan from an insurance company, which are empaneled with us. We call them as annuity service providers. And if the corpus is less than or equal to 5 lakhs, the entire amount is paid in a lump sum. Apart from normal exit with on superannuation or at age of 60, if anybody wants to exit the system earlier, then we call it as a premature exit. And in that case, 80% of the corpus has to be annuitized. That means annuity plan scheme has to be purchased from the annuity service providers, and only 20% will be paid as a lump sum. And if the corpus is less than 2.5 lakhs, the entire amount is paid in cash. And in case of unfortunate death, what happens is that the corpus is returned to the nominees, entire corpus, and the nominee has also had an option to take the entire amount as cash or purchase an annuity plan also from the insurance company. The benefit of purchasing an annuity plan from NPS is that it is exempt from a GST of 1.8% that is applicable right now. As I told you that the annuity plan, 40% has to be utilized for purchasing an annuity plan from an insurance company. We have 14 insurance companies empaneled with us, and we call them annuity service providers. And all the leading insurance companies are with us, and they offer a variety of plans. The pure annuities with at one extreme, and at the other extreme you have return of capital also with 50% or 100% of the pension flowing to the spouse also. So these are there are different varieties of plans. First, the choice has to be on the plan or the insurance provider or the annuity service provider and the plan, and then the annuity or the pension will flow to the subscriber. The choices has to be made at the point of exit. Regarding the other choices, we have 3 record keepers. That also there's a choice that has to be exercised while joining the scheme. And the next choice is about the pension fund or the fund managers. We have 7 fund managers right now. Those are all leading names in the industry: State Bank, LIC, UTI, ICICI, HDFC, Kotak, Aditya Birla. So they have obtained licenses for us, and they have registered as fund managers, and they manage the funds, and the subscriber needs to choose any one of them. And this choice can be changed once by a subscriber after joining also. So we have given the flexibility that it's not that once the choice is made, it remains sacrosanct. It can be changed once in a year. Next comes how the contributions will be allocated between the different asset classes, how the contributions will be invested by the fund manager. So we offer 4 choices, in fact: equity, corporate bonds, government securities, and alternate assets. And we have limits of investments, means that saying that such percentage of the contributions can only go to this asset classes. For equity, we have said that it's not more than 75%. and for alternate asset 5%. And or otherwise 100% can flow into the corporate bonds or the government securities. So this choice when a subscriber makes or an individual makes on his own, saying that this percentage of my contribution should go to this asset class. So we call it as an active choice. And this choice also can be changed twice in a year. If a subscriber is not very conversant to making the choice or making the decision of what asset classes he needs to choose, we have auto choice or a life cycle funds that we call it. And here what happens, the contributions are allocated in predetermined proportion between the three asset classes: equity, corporate bonds, and government securities. We have three life cycle funds: or LC75, or a moderate or life cycle 50, or conservative life cycle 25. The numbers at LC life cycle 75, 50, and 25 denotes the equity exposure. So 75 aggressive fund has a 75 equity exposure, moderate has a 50 equity exposure, and conservative has a 25% of the contributions being exposed to having equity exposure. So until the age of 35, this proportion remains constant, whatever has been displayed on the screen. So 75% equity and 25% debt in the aggressive fund. And on the 36th birthday, auto rebalancing happens. Equity exposure reduces by 4% and 4% increases on the debt side. So at the age of 50, what happens? Each birthday from 36th year till the age of 50, the auto rebalancing will happen. And at the age of 50, the aggressive fund will have only 20% of equity exposure. The moderate one will have only 15%, and the last conservative will only have 5% of equity exposure, and 95% will be in debt. So this choice also can be changed between the life cycle funds or the auto choice between this life cycle funds, and it can be changed between active and auto also. This change we permit twice in a year. Returns, as I've told, in fact, we have been able to deliver almost nearing about double-digit returns. So we have a track record of more than 13 years in the central government and the state government funds. And in the others, we have around more than 12 years, we started in May 2009. So equity has been able to deliver. This is our average average returns of all the 7 fund managers. So equity fund managers have been able to deliver around 12.85% over the period of 12 years. Corporate bonds 9.86%, government securities 9.4%. Central government scheme is a composite scheme with 15% equity exposure, 32% corporate bonds, and 50% government securities. So over a period of more than 13 years, the fund has given a return of 9.90%. Similarly, also the state government fund has given a return of 9.79%, which is also a composite scheme similar to the central government scheme. The amount of corpus that we manage and the number of subscribers as on 18th November, this is a snapshot of that. So we have around 4 crores 80 lakhs subscribers with us, and 6 lakhs 95,000 crores of corpus that has been regulated by us. So majority of the subscribers, if you see, are from the government schemes, APY, Atal Pension Yojana, and NPS Life, which almost around 3 crores 62 lakhs. From the central and the state governments, we have around 77 lakhs. And from the non-government side, which are voluntary schemes, that is the corporate segment that we told, there is an employer-employee relationship, we have around 13.28 lakhs subscribers. And individuals joining voluntarily, those who are self-employed or maybe on their own without an employer, who are also employed in other establishments, there's a 19.14 lakhs. So total non-government subscribers, we have around 32.5 lakh subscribers, of which 6 lakhs most probably will be around bank employees. So the corpus distribution is also skewed towards the government employees because central and state governments almost constitute 5 lakhs 60,000 crores. And in the non-government sector, that we are talking about the corporate and the all citizen model, individuals joining voluntarily, we have around 1,09,000 crores. And the government sponsored scheme of NPS Life and Atal Pension Yojana, we have 25,000 crores. So when I talked about accessibility, we said that every transaction can be tracked. We have a web-based login for the available to the subscriber and a mobile app also. So on both these interfaces, the customer can view and transact on his account also. He can make contributions. He can change the fund manager. He can change asset allocations. He can change his personal details also. And this can be done through OTP authentication without any paper movement. And if the user ID is the account number, which remains constant, as I told you, it's a unique number. So the user ID will always be remaining the same. And the password can also be generated online if the mobile number is updated. So the OTP will flow there and verifications will be done and the password can be created and access the account. Lastly, I'll come about the system that we have set in for addressing subscriber grievances, if any in the system. We have a regulations for that to address any grievances that the subscriber may face in the entire architecture or in the entire structure. So we have a regulations to that, and we have specified that how it's to be logged in or how it's to be addressed and what within what time frame the resolution has to be provided. And we have an escalation matrix also. The grievance, if any, can be submitted online also. We have a central grievance redressal mechanism that's online. It can be logged in with the number and then the grievance can be raised, or it can be through an email, or it can be through a letter. It can be in a physical mode also. So we say that within 30 days, it has to be resolved by the intermediary or the entity that against whom the grievance is raised. And we have an escalation metric that if it's not satisfied, it can be escalated to the trust. And if it's not resolved or the resolution provided is not satisfactory, it can be escalated to the ombudsman, then to the authority also. And even if it's not satisfied with the resolution being provided by the authority, it can be escalated to the Securities Appellate Tribunal. But we don't have any such cases as on date. So with this, I'll end my presentation, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of this session. Over to you, Mr. Rajesh.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable input. Now, I request our last panelist, Ms. Anshrita ji, please take your input.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can we have the slides, please?
And can you share the sharing rights to me?
I already shared the sharing rights.
The chairperson ID.
Thank you. So today in this session, we'll be looking at various tax incentives which are available for the investment in NPS. We shall also discuss the important changes which have been made by the Finance Act 2020 and the rule which was thereafter notified in March 21, which impacts the computation in the sections that have been amended by this Finance Act. We'll move to the next slide, please. So there are different income tax incentives and the implications for the different stages of the contribution or the accrution to the fund, and also from the withdrawal from the fund. So we will look at what are the incentives available, or what are the benefits which are available to the employee as well as the employer in case of the contribution which is made by the employer to the employee's account, as well as the contribution which is made by the employee to his account in the NPS. As I mentioned earlier, that there's a rule now which has come into place for the annual accretion to the employee's account in the fund, and we'll also look at how it impacts the computation of the total income of the employee. As Mr. Mono said, there are also implications on withdrawal at the different points of time. So we'll look at the implication under the Income Tax Act for the withdrawal by the employee of his accumulated corpus from the fund on retirement or on some specific work-life exigency. So we'll get into the detailed discussion now for the various aspects that we just saw. Moving on to the next slide. this is quite a busy slide, so we'll take some time to go through the whole details. So we'll look at it in a different buckets. So we'll first look at the deduction which is available to the individual for the contribution made by him. So as per section 80 CCD subsection 1, a central government employee after 1st January 2004 or employee of any other employer, if he makes a contribution to the NPS account, he gets a deduction in computing his total income. That means he can reduce his tax liability by taking a deduction from his total income of the amount of contribution that he has made, which does not exceed 10% of his salary. This benefit is also available to a self-employed individual, and the benefit for a self-employed individual is the deduction he can claim of the amount that he has actually contributed up to an amount of 20% of his gross total income. Now, when we come to the computation of the percentage with respect to the employees, the amount of salary on which he has to compute the 10% is the amount, that means the basic and the dearness allowance, but it excludes all other allowances and perquisites. A very important point to note here is that this deduction is available within the limit of 1,50,000, which is as per section 80 CCE. So 80 CCE, the total amount of deduction that you get on the amount that you pay under section 80C, 80 triple C, and 80 CCD subsection 1 that we just saw, all the three should not go beyond 1,50,000. So the contribution made to NPS is within this limit under this particular subsection 1 of section 80 CCD. Now, with a view to encourage people to contribute towards NPS, there was a new subsection introduced, section 80 CCD subsection 1B, which provides for an additional deduction in respect of amount paid up to rupees 50,000 for contribution made by individual taxpayer under the NPS. Now, this amount is over and above the deduction which is claimed under subsection 1 of 80 CCD. There was an amendment or a new section was introduced, section 115 BAC, which provides for a lower tax regime for individuals. So if an individual opts for a lower tax regime under section 115 BAC, he cannot claim certain deductions. So in that, so if he is contributing to NPS, then and if he opts for a lower tax regime under 115 BAC, he cannot avail of the deduction under 80 CCD1. That means the deduction of his contribution to the NPS. Then we'll look at the deduction for the employer. If an employer contributes to the NPS, then what are the implications to the employee as well as to the employer? So now first we look at section 17. Now section 17 is the section which deals with taxation of salary in the hands of employee. So employer's contribution to NPS is taxable as salary under section 17 subsection 1 subclause 8. So what we call 17(1)(8). Because the definition of salary includes the contribution made by a government or any other employer to the account of an employee under NPS. Section 17(2)(7). This is the section which has undergone an amendment by the Finance Act 2020, and it provides that the amount of employer contribution made to the account of the employee in a recognized provident fund, in NPS, and in an approved superannuation fund, if it is exceeding rupees 7,50,000, then that excess will be taxed as perquisite. We will look at this provision into more detail when we go to the next part of the discussion. But as of now, this is what is the new provision that we should be aware of. As per section 80 CCD subsection 2, contribution made by employer to the employee's account under NPS is allowed as a deduction. And if you are an employee of the central government, then the deduction is up to amount of 14% of salary. And for a non-government employer, the deduction for such employee is up to 10% of the salary. So in other words, any contribution made by employer in excess of this particular percentage will be taxable in the hands of the employee. Now this particular deduction is unlike the section 115 BAC, the one that we discussed some time back. So deduction is available for the employer contribution even if the individual opts for the lower tax regime under section 115 BAC. And the benefit to the employer is that the employer can claim this amount of contribution to the employee's NPS account as a business expenditure under section 36 of the Income Tax Act. Then we'll look at the section 1727A, which deals with the annual accretion to the NPS account. Now, as I mentioned, the section 1727 and section 1727A, these are the new provisions which were introduced by the Finance Act 2020. And this provides that the annual accretion by way of income in the nature of, say, interest and dividend or any other amount of similar nature during a year to the balance standing at the credit of the scheme, in our case NPS, to the extent it relates to the contribution which is included in the taxable income of a previous year. That means annual accretion of the sum which is part of the contribution excess of 7,50,000. This will also get taxed in the hands of the employee. So up to that amount will not be taxable. When we talk about the withdrawal from the fund, we'll again have to look at section 80 CCDT D3, because this subsection says that any amount which is withdrawn on account of closure or is opting out of the pension scheme or as a pension received from his annuity plan will be taxable in the hands of the employee, except when the amount is received by a nominee on the death of the taxpayer, then such amount would not be taxed in the hands of the nominee. Also, we have to look at section 80 CCD subsection 5, where the taxpayer shall be deemed not to have received any amount in the previous year if such amount is used for purchasing an annuity plan in the same previous year. Now, when we talk about the exemptions, we have to look at the section 10, and section 10 subsection 12A provides that any payment from NPS on closure of his account or if he opts out of the pension scheme, then to that extent it does not exceed 60% of the amount payable at the time of such closure or is opting out of NPS, then such amount is actually exempt in his hand. Also, section 10 subsection 12B talks about any withdrawal from NPS, say partial withdrawal in accordance with the conditions specified by PFRDA and the regulations made therein, then to the extent such withdrawal does not exceed 25%, 25% of such amount is exempt in the hands of the employee. We also have to look at the one more particular section, section 80C. Particularly, this deduction is available to employees of the central government, and this is the deduction that you get within the limit of 1,50,000 in case of central government employee contributing to the tier 2 account, and this particular account has to be for a fixed period of not less than 3 years and as per the provisions of PFRDA. Then the deduction is allowed under section 80C, as I said, to the extent of within the limits of 1,50,000. We will now move on to the next slide. Now, as I said, Finance Act 2020 has made an important amendment to the provisions of Section 17, the perquisite valuation 17.2. Now, we'll have to look at the background of why this provision has been introduced in the Act. Now, as you're aware, up to the assessment year 2021, there was no upper cap on the employer's contribution to the various employees' welfare schemes. Separate provisions were available in the Income Tax Act to tax such contribution. Superannuation fund was taxable as perquisite under section 1727 in the hands of the employee only if such contribution was above rupees 1,50,000 during the year. Employer's contribution to NPS is taxable in the hands of the employee and including salary income. We have just seen that. However, and also we have seen that the deduction is allowed to the employee for such contribution to the extent of the lower of the amount contributed to the NPS or as per the percentage. If you're a non-government employee, then up to 10%. Employer's contribution exceeding 12% of salary in EPF account was taxable in the hands of the employee. So anything above 12% of his salary, the contribution the employer was taxable in his hand. Now, this particular provision was introduced in the Finance Bill 2020, and the intent of the amendment which was proposed in the Finance Bill was articulated in the explanatory memorandum to the Finance Bill to tax excess amounts of contribution made to the trial funds in case of high salaried employees. So what it said was that, as we said, there was no combined upper limit for the purpose of deduction on the amount of contribution made by the employer. This, as per the memorandum, is giving undue benefit to employees earning high salary income. While the employee with low salary income is not able to let the employer contribute a large part of his salary to all these three funds, employees with high salary income were able to design the salary package in a manner where a large part of the salary was paid by employer in these three funds. Thus, this portion of salary does not suffer taxation at any point of time since EEE, that is exempt regime, is followed for these three funds. So, as the memorandum stated, it was proposed to provide a combined upper limit of 7,50,000 in respect of employers' contribution in a year to NPS, superannuation fund, and recognized provident fund, and any excess contribution is now taxable. So consequently, there is this provision of 17(2)(7)(a), which is also was introduced, which provides that any annual accretion by way of interest, dividend, or any other amount of similar nature during the previous year to the balance at the credit of the fund or the scheme may be treated as taxable perquisite to the extent related to the employee's contribution, which is included in the total income. So this is linked directly to the excess contribution over 7,50,000. So therefore, accretion to the NPS fund, which is in the nature of interest or dividend or income of similar nature, will be considered for the purpose of section 17(2)(7). Now, how do you arrive at this number? Because okay, we know that this will be based on the excess contributions over 7,50,000, but how do we arrive at this number? So for this purpose, the government introduced Rule 3B to the income tax rules by way of notification dated 5th March 2021, and which says this is a formula based rule, and which says that a particular formula which is to be used for the purpose of arriving at this number. Now, if we just look at this formula, it looks very daunting. If you look at the formula, which says TP is equal to PC2 into R plus PC1 plus TP1 into R. Now, how do we decipher this? TP is nothing but the taxable perquisite for the particular year that you are computing your income. TP1 is the total of the taxable perquisite under this provision of 17(2)(7)(a) for the previous year before 1st April 2020, because this section came into effect from 1st April 2020. So the first year for which returns have been filed, assessment year 21-22, takes into account this particular rule. PC is the amount of contribution made by the employer in excess of 7,50,000 to these three funds that we saw. PC1 again is the amount of such excess contribution made up to the current, so anything before your current previous year, but from 1st April 2020. R is basically the rate which is arrived at based on the income and the F average. That means income of the income accrued to during the current year in the specified fund upon the average of the opening and the closing balance of the specified funds. So that is the rate which is applied, and based on this you have to arrive at this amount of the taxable perquisite. Now, an important point to notice, they have also considered, if there are withdrawals, then what happens, and the withdrawals are excess of the provisions. So in simple words, the perquisite arising from the annual accretion on the employee's contribution to these funds shall be the average return, that is I upon F average, on the sum of half of the current year's contribution in excess of rupees 7,50,000, contribution in excess of 7,50,000 up to the last year, and the accretion taxable as perquisite up to the last year. So if these two amounts, that is the contribution in excess of 7,50,000 and accretion which is the taxable perquisite up to the last year, if they exceed the opening balance of the fund, then that excess is to be ignored while computing this amount under section 17(2)(7)(a). So since we have seen that this is the formula based, so since the average return of all the funds have to be computed, which is your R, which is based on the aggregate of the opening and closing of all the funds, say for example, Provident Fund and NPS, there is no need to ascertain whether the excess is from Provident Fund or NPS. Because many times we get this question that the excess is arising out of these three funds. How do we allocate the interest which has to be, or the amount which has accrued or accreted to the amount, to the balance of the fund? So this is the answer to that, the formula takes care of all the averaging of the withdrawals and the opening closing balances. So I think in view of the timing, we will not get into the calculation. This is just the illustration of the formula that we had given. So we'll skip this. So that's all from my side. Thank you for a patient hearing. Thank you.
So I thank you everybody for such a wonderful session. I think we have a few questions here. If I'm allowed, I may start with a question on my own. That can an annuity be made available that will take care of inflation? Annuity is linked to CPI and is being done, we believe, in case of government pension. But is there an option available for other citizens as well for something which can be inflation linked? I would request Chairman Sir if we can throw some light on this.
Yes, that has been our desire also, because today a lot of people, once the annuity starts, now the scheme of annuities like that remains constant for your lifetime. Of course, there is one annuity which gives a simple this thing of rise of 3% per year, but obviously that will not take care of the risk of inflation. So we have been talking to the insurance regulator, because annuity basically is their domain. And we have been talking to the annuity service providers also, that whether they can think of this kind of variable annuities, which gives some cushion against the rise of inflation. So the latest news that I have, they have had some working committee on that, and some report is also submitted. We are in discussion with the IRDA to ensure that those kind of products are released as quickly as possible. The only issue will be, I believe Suranjan also can throw some light on that. If we have that kind of annuity product, what will ultimately happen? There will be variation in the payouts. So one has to really take care of that. Today, even if I am getting 6% a fixed annuity rate, that is fixed for my lifetime. But in that case, that may not so happen. There are cases when we see that mostly during February or May quarter, that there is a tendency that this thing comes down, the CPI comes down a little bit. So in that case, maybe we can see a situation where the annuity rates also will come down. So those kind of these things are there. Another issue that normally the annuity service providers face is that the kind of instruments. See, if I provide some kind of benefit under my product, and I assume certain kind of liabilities by selling that product, I should have assets also which can give me protection against annuity. As a veteran player in the bond market, you will also understand there were sort of government bonds, index-linked government bonds at one point of time. So if those kind of bonds are available and available on continuous basis, maybe it will be a little easier for the annuity service providers. So that is from my side. Suranjan, if you can throw.
Sure, no, I agree. So thank you. Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add is maybe that also, given the uncertainty with inflation, these annuities can get very, very expensive as well.
Yes.
And I think, like you mentioned, life expectancy is increasing. And if insurance companies can't actually hedge some of that inflation risk, they're going, it's going to lead to very, very prohibitively expensive annuity rates. So maybe a compromiser is something like, the LIC rate of fixed 3%. So the individual gets some increase, but it's known in advance, right? So there are some products which potentially can be looked at, which give you fixed increases, which reduces some volatility and therefore maybe comes at a slightly better cost. Right?
Yeah. So other questions, maybe if somebody can tell us what the other questions are.
Yeah, Rajesh, you can take some of the questions. I think there are lots of questions which we are seeing from participants actually. So another question which actually I saw coming is, then the product be explained for employees and citizens who've turned NRIs due to work-related transfers?
NRIs?
If somebody is actually having a pension year and then during the life cycle, if he turns NRI, how does this work in terms of pension schemes?
It is open to NRIs also. NPS is open to NRIs as well as OCIs. Maybe 1.5 years, 2 years back, we made it open to even OCIs, overseas citizens of India. So they can as well contribute. There is no restriction on that.
Nipah, there are a lot of questions. Yes, there are a lot of questions we have received, and all the question in the chat box. So I request to all the panelists, if anyone wanted to explain and give the answers.
We are we are giving the answers, but few questions that for everybody's this thing benefit, I can say that somebody has asked whether Tier 2 is taxable. Yes, I believe Mr. Fukan also made it very clear. Tier 2 does not have any tax benefit. It will be taxed at the marginal rate of tax when you go and withdraw. Tier 2 is an just option, because Tier 1 will not give you that kind of early accessibility to the fund because it is meant for pension. So maybe only 3 times we allow partial withdrawal, and that too with some restrictions. But in Tier 2, if you continue to put funds, it will give you attractive returns. And at the same time, at any given point of time, you can have access on the entire fund also. No questions asked. But yes, it does not come with any specific tax benefit. So somebody has asked a very interesting question. Along with EPF, you get benefits of EPS 1995 and EDLI, Employees Deposit Linked Insurance, if I understand correctly. Whether contributions to NPS are also going to be linked with some sort of life insurance. NPS is basically for providing pension, so it does not come with any kind of life insurance at the present time. So it is like that. And when you are putting in EPF, actually a part of the contribution goes to EPS also and EDLI also. But here, when you are putting the money, entire thing goes for NPS only. So that helps in creating a larger corpus. Somebody had asked that through employer, maybe they have this thing, superannuation also and PF also. Yes, still you can have NPS. As Suranjan has very nicely explained that with addition of NPS, again, your net replacement rate goes up and that helps you. Somebody has asked, does NPS employer's contribution above 1.5 lakh is taxable in the hands of employee? No, it's not like that. Now, Smita madam has clearly pointed out, employer contribution on all three, if it exceeds 7.5 lakh, then only it will be taxable in the hands of employee. Otherwise, how NPS, the employer contribution is treated, it is treated fully as a perquisite first in the hands of the employee. It is added, and exactly the equivalent amount is deducted under section 80 CCD 2. So the net effect is 0. But it does not have any linkage to that 1.5 lakh, that limit. No.
Thank you so much, sir, for your all the answer. I request Deepa ma'am, please deliver the formal vote of thanks.
And somebody has asked for sharing the NPS. I believe, yes, it will be all shared. And I request Mr. Rajesh that if it can be shared with the participants also. So that way people will come to know.
It can be done.
Yes, it's yours, sir.
Sir, I would also have one more question that, we did say that we can actually move from one investment pattern to another investment, the asset class allocation. How frequently one can do this looking at the market trends, or is it limited to a certain time horizon? And is the cost of moving from debt to equity, is it very high or it's not very high?
First part of the question is that there is no this thing. It is allowed twice a year, but what should be the gap? It is not mentioned.
Okay.
And now in very short period of time, we are going to increase it to 4 times, because there are requests that you allow more number of times. But the only cautionary note that we are telling, or we are trying to tell people, is that it's after all a long-term investment, a pension corpus that you are building up. So don't treat it as maybe a mutual fund sort of thing. So people sometimes actually mix it up with mutual fund kind of thing, that it is also giving a good return, it is mutual fund. So you have to give it some time, and thereafter only you use it judiciously, but we are going to increase it to 4 times. But there is no upfront cost. No, absolutely there is no cost involved. It will be obviously the way it is transferred at the NAV of the this thing, transferee scheme or transferee fund, it will be unitized, but no cost is involved.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I really take this opportunity. So we all overestimate what we can achieve in a day and underestimate what we can achieve over decades. Creating a retirement nest egg is marathon and not a 100-meter race. It requires discipline, determination, and dedication, and it's easier said than done. And thankfully, we have a wonderful vehicle called NPS, which can transform this journey, which is into a much easier one. I want to take this opportunity to thank PFRDA for the wonderful work which is done over the last many years. I think the concept moving from defined benefit to defined contribution, I think has made a lot of us aware of what we need to do in a demography like India, where I think the most of us are in the age of 20 and 30s, where we are going to see more and more people retiring, and it's going to be an important vehicle. And we genuinely thank Chairman PFRDA Bandopadhyay ji to come and give us a talk on this subject, which really is an eye-opener and also allows a lot of us to move in this segment and understand this segment better. I also take opportunity to thank Chief General Manager PFRDA, Mr. Fukon, for taking time and enlightening us today. I sincerely thank Mr. Banerjee for sharing his thoughts and benefits of retirement planning, and Ms. Smita Parukar on her views on tax implication and benefits of NPS. Most importantly, I want to also thank each and every one of you who's taken time out today to attend this webinar. As we all know, and with 25 years in Financial Circle, I know that compounding is nothing but an eighth wonder in the world, and how people who actually contribute to it realize the benefits, and people who don't realize it actually miss out on it. So thank you, sir, once again for being part of it, and all of you. I sincerely thank Team ASSOCHEM, led by Rajesh ji, also to be part of this important seminars. All I can say is happy saving, happy investing, and happy 2022 for all of you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.